All right, welcome everybody. Happy Monday. I hope y'all are staying safe. We've had a tornado warning over here, so it's been a fun morning, sort of. Just a little bit before Agnes gets started. So please remember to submit your deliverables. So far I've sent you the forms for the resume or CV submission, and then the letter to someone you met at the career fair. So I will be sending you out the one for today. In a follow-up email a little bit later. Kristen and I will also send you guys some feedback on your deliverables that you've already submitted. We are recruiting a couple more mentors at the moment, so we'll send information on those people as soon as we have it. And again, we'll send out the survey tomorrow for you guys to kind of record your preference for your mentors. So Jada, I know you said you'd help monitor the chat today, so just in case Agnes loses track of it, feel free to shout out. The rest of you guys are feel free to shout out or drop questions in the chat as we go. I'd like to welcome Agnes McIntosh today. She will be presenting Nailed It, the interview today. So I'll let her get started. Thanks, Agnes.
Thank you so much. And I did alter the title a little bit on Rocking Your Interview. And thank you so much for having me back and everybody joining. I know there were some notifications for tornado storms this morning and heavy storms. So I hope we all keep, our connection throughout this presentation. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, and I think some of you were part of the first inaugural cohort in the fall for the mentorship program. So welcome back and thank you for inviting me again. I presented on elevator pitches for scientists then. And so I'm really excited to join you today about talking about interview and having that important conversation. And just a little bit about myself before I get started into our talk is I'm currently a senior career coach for students interested in health, sustainability, and sciences at Agnes Scott College. And before that, I spent 5 years at Emory, including being an employer relations and recruitment person at Rollins School of Public Health. And in that role, I really had a unique perspective working with employers and hiring managers very closely on internships, part-time and full-time roles that our students were good fits for. And then really working on the student side, coaching them for, resumes, cover letters, personal statements, for programs, and then also for mock interviews, which I really love to do. That's one of the things I really love to do. So this, topic is very close to my heart. The other thing I wanted you to know is I really love working with first-gen students. As a first-gen student in my undergraduate years at University of Pennsylvania, and then doing my MPH at Rollins School of Public Health, I really feel like that career exploration and that important connection to people and also to resources was something that I really didn't experience during my school years. And so that's something I really appreciate now. And I hope that I can continue that connection with you guys. Okay. So before we get started, I wanted to go over a little bit of the agenda today. And the first thing is we're going to go over some of the dry information. We had to go through the interview life cycle, some of the different interviewing formats I want you guys to be familiar with, some common interview questions, telling your career story, decoding what employers want, like hiring managers' perspective, and the important salary conversation is what we're going to also touch on. And then I want to leave you with some key takeaways and some resources. Okay, so with that, I wanted to know, as a coach, I like to kind of gauge the audience a little bit. I want to know on a scale 1 to 5, so what is your confidence level with interviews in general? If you want to put that in chat right now, 1 would be like, I know nothing, I really could use a lot of help. And 5 would be like, you know what, I'm ready, I'm really confident each time I interview. Okay, seeing a lot of 3s in. Oh, someone's, okay, seeing some good things. Oh, someone has an 8, I love that. So in general, probably like most people, you have some idea of like what to expect, but kind of, is this fair to say, get tripped up in certain areas or maybe feel like you could prepare a little bit more to get your confidence level up? Is that fair to say? Okay. Okay, great. And then can you just also drop in chat, what are your like main concerns? What are your top concerns about interviewing? Just think of things that just come to mind right now. Salary question. Okay, we will spend some time on that. I've got some good deflecting questions for you guys. Being nervous, yes, of course, because you know what, we have like these physiological responses to, you know, public speaking and interviewing, and your heart rate goes up. And so sometimes people can tend to overshare information or just have really short answers and not elaborate because they're not sure or just kind of nervous about hitting some of their talking points. Okay. It's about discussing visa matters, someone mentioned. Okay, an expected future comes up. Yes, that's always the question. What do you want to do with your life, with your career? What's the next steps? Being long-winded. Yes, we're going to work on some strategies on kind of keeping it very concise and what to, like a sort of an approach to how you could do that. Okay. Yes, we're going to also kind of cover what are your weaknesses questions too. Okay. So I want you guys, I want this to be interactive. I want this to be a candid career conversation where you feel comfortable asking me any questions as we go along the way, okay? Okay, so the interview life cycle, I'm not sure if you have seen this before. Some of it's very, you know, very common sense things like confirm your logistics, who reaches out to you for setting up their interview. So we're kind of assuming that all your application materials are in order, your resume, your cover letter, and they're like so excited to meet with you and someone reaches out to you from the organization. So what do you want to do? These are like the preparation steps and they're kind of logical in terms of researching the organization. And I know you guys have like super sleuthing skills from all your research and science backgrounds that you have. And so I want you to apply that in your preparing for your interview. And honestly, that could take you up to half a day if you're doing it like doing a deep dive in the organization and then follow, like really seeing who you're going to be interviewing with and what, not just who you're interviewing with, but what is their role in the organization and what, when you meet with them, is the most important thing to get across to them and something that will be memorable when you meet with them. So, and you also want to develop your answers, and that's where we're going to kind of spend some time on like developing approach that kind of gives you talking points and that will make you feel comfortable as you're in the interview. And of course, you're going to practice. That is the most important thing. Find someone you feel comfortable with, whether it's someone in their career development office or a peer or somewhere where you want to like get your answers and kind of anticipate some questions that you might be asked. The visual impressions matter, and we're going to go over, and I have some resources I'm going to share with you, and one important is like how to look good or how to look better on Zoom. So we'll go through some of that. And then really, I can't, you know, tell you enough that when you're prepared, just like you do for a test or anything you do that you're nervous about, the more you prepare, the more you can be like, you know what, it's okay, I've got this. Even if you don't have like a whole script to go through, because really just think about your most meaningful conversations with people. You have sort of like talking points, but it's scripted and unscripted, okay? So I don't want you to come across or feel like you're robotic. And I know interviewing doesn't come naturally to everybody, and it's just something that you'll just learn each time with more experience, okay? And lastly, the part of the interview life cycle I want to also make sure and point out that you do is follow up with a thank you email to everyone that you interview at each of the stages of your interview process. Okay, next, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with different interview formats, but just bear with me. We're just going to go through a few things. And I actually am going to give you an example of some of these formats and some questions that might be asked along the way with my mentee that I was paired with last semester, Emily. And so she is, I'll tell you a little bit more about what she's doing now, but I was really proud of her and her preparation for interviews. So we will go over that in sort of the different steps and formats of the interview. So you have a first round, usually like a screener. Someone from HR that may not even be the person you're working with might reach out to you and just kind of gauge your interest. And then you'll probably have a longer, lengthy second interview. then you could possibly have a panel interview, and then you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the job with the content and everything. Okay. And I also wanted to point out that interviewing, and you guys know this, it's a two-way conversation. Your first interview is not just about like getting the job, it's just getting asked back for the next conversation, okay? So think about it from the perspective of each side. Like, what is the recruiter really wanting to know, or the interviewer at each stage, and kind of anticipating on your side, like, and I know a lot of people probably have imposter syndrome in thinking about like, am I qualified for this position? And a lot of times, you know, we undersell ourselves and not even apply for positions because we don't know how our skills and experiences would transfer to what you're going after. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So, so I just wanted to kind of put you in that framework that, you know, they're just not interviewing you, you're interviewing them, and thinking about like, is this organization, I see myself there? What is their mission, their goals, and do I see myself there and working with the team that I'm going to be talking with? Okay, so do we have any questions so far right now? Okay. And some of these common questions, you know, it's the question about tell me about yourself. I think this is where the most work is, because you're telling like your story. I think a lot of people have a lot of anxiety about this. Like somebody mentioned about like rambling on and everything. So we're going to go over some of the things that you could kind of put a framework on how you can answer that question. And then I think you guys know, someone said about what are your strengths and weaknesses. This is absolutely something that, you know, it's something that you practice and you kind of write out, and then just think of like key examples of things that you would share with them. And then, are you guys familiar with like behavioral questions that they ask you? We'll go over a little bit about it. And it's always a, tell me about a time when you, or it could be a hypothetical, like if you were in this situation, what would you do if there's like conflict in your team or something like that? I'm not going to go over the right side of this slide very much because I believe most of you are in graduate school already. And I'm sure you had some interviews that you had to go to get where you are. Okay. So next, I just wanted to point out I think the interviews that go really well, and when I kind of like get feedback from the students or early career professionals I talk with, and Emily also shared this with me, it's like telling your career story, like what's like, and put it in a narrative, compelling way so that you are kind of connecting the dots about your experiences. And you don't have to really, the person you interview with doesn't want to have a straight, like your resume. Some people who, you know, not everybody's a good interviewer, and some people might be like, walk me through your resume, okay? You could do chronological, but what I would do is kind of highlight your most relevant experiences for the role that you're applying for, okay? So a career story is also like an arc, and you are the main character. You have to believe this is why you're interested in this position today, because of these different things that kind of piqued your interest in this role and in this career field, okay? And it also helps to create a connection with the interviewer, because they'll, you know, there's certain things about it. Sometimes it's not like what you say, but it's how you say it and the feeling that people get. You know, sometimes at the end of a interview, I've had people say, oh, I feel really good about this. I feel really good about you and your interest in this position, and I look forward to talking with you. Okay, and what makes you memorable? So, tell me about yourself. Like, first of all, this is sort of a framework where you can talk about like, what are you doing now? What will you hope to do? Any pivotal learning experiences, why you chose the career, and connecting the dots for the interview. That's really important. And focusing on relevant. It doesn't have to be the most recent. And interesting things about your background and your backstory that makes a good fit for this job. And really the difference between a background and backstory, your background is like your whole history on your resume. Your backstory is what brought you to this point, like in terms of like why you're interested in this, in learning more about this career field or about this particular organization or this job. And then what value do you add to the organization? So in 1 to 2 minutes is really the sweet spot for this. And I know this is something you get everywhere, right? And from what my understanding is, you're going to prepare for a virtual career fair. Is that right? For next time. And so this is something you can practice and kind of get your story straight in like 1.5 to 2 minutes here. Okay. And I'm going to give you in the next few slides a few examples about Tell Me Yourself, and you can, it's like a nuance thing about like what you start with. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a minute to look at this. This is very, you know, I'm a current graduate student completing this degree. What did you do in your undergrad a little bit? Like an experience in Guatemala led you to your interest in health disparities, and then a little bit about an internship. And then, so this is perfectly fine, succinct, but I think you can lose somebody after a minute of like kind of like just talking, rambling on. It doesn't leave them a lot of time to interject. I don't know if that has been your experience sometimes where you feel like, oh my gosh, am I saying too much like up front? And you're just going like straight away because there are talking points, obviously, that you want to get across, right? Okay, so this next slide here, it's the same information, but it kind of presents itself in a different order. And one of the resources I'm sharing with you, and I have a resource slide at the end of the presentation, someone from LinkedIn Learning, Jody Glickman, who has been like kind of a career shifter throughout her life, she talks about how, and she works with clients in this exact area, how, you know, sometimes you lead with your destination, which means you want to tell them exactly why you're interested in the first place. And like this person would tell you, like, instead of saying, I'm a grad student, I was an undergrad student studying this and this, you start off with, nice to meet you. I'm really interested in the intersection of health science and particularly clinical research and product development. And then you talk about why you're applying for the position and what you admire about it, about the organization and the role, and then about how you're going to have a conversation about it today. And then you can kind of talk about, you know, sometimes people say, oh, well, tell me a little bit more about your background and your studies and what you're doing. And then this is where you can go into a little bit about your history as a student, or I know some of you probably have some work experience or didn't go straight from undergrad to grad. And this is where you can have a few examples ready to talk about with them. So there's just a little bit of a nuance, but I think what this person on LinkedIn was saying is that that's really what gets you kind of like the callback. If you kind of put it up front, what you sort of like, why you are interviewing for this role or what you hope to do with your background. Okay. So let me see. So behavioral questions here. And you know what, before we get into the behavioral questions, for the common questions, I wanted to ask everybody this. What are some of like the quirkiest questions or most unusual questions you've had in interviews so far? Something that kind of like tripped you up or something. I can share with you, you know, a student who I worked with recently was applying to something at the Decatur Nature Preserve, and I'm sorry, Dunwoody Nature Preserve, and someone asked her, so if you were an animal, what type of animal would you be? I've been asked, how many ladders do you think there are in the US? And it's really people trying to get like your approach and how you're like thinking out loud. It's not one right answer. really, it's just kind of, it's sort of like a thought-provoking, like self-reflective question. Okay, I just saw somebody's comment about the example 2. Was asked to tell a joke. That's interesting. And I will tell you one of the things that Emily shared with me. She was interviewing with a contract research organization, and they asked her, like, what is your favorite assay? Or someone has asked, like, what is your favorite invention? That's what at Rollins School of Public Health, they would ask that in part of the mock interviews. And it really, sometimes it puts you on the spot. It could be very interesting. So just, depending on, the type of job you're applying for and how open they are, they might ask you some things like that. Or they might ask, what do you do in your free time? Okay. So this is the behavioral question approach or method that we use at Agnes Scott. Some might know it as the STAR method, which is situation, task, action, results. We do the situation, action, results here. And it's a really good framework for kind of thinking about, what is the context of what you're telling your career story, or like, tell me about a time when you, and it really depends on what type of job or what role you're going to be doing. If it's a communications role, they're going to ask you more specific questions about communication. So have 2 or 3 relevant examples of that. And it doesn't have to be your most recent, it's the most relevant communications thing that you've done throughout undergrad, grad, work experience. Same for the action. What kind of action did you take? What were your roles and responsibilities, and what was your role? And it doesn't have to be you didn't have to like create something from scratch. You could like co-launch something, co-develop something. You could co-present if it was like at a conference, and then describe the purpose and what happened. So this method is really good, not just for like verbally communicating your experiences, but it's also really good for when you do your bullet points for your resumes. And then I like to tell students, if you can interject with, like, how can you quantify it too? Like I increase our communications by 25% using different, platforms, social media platforms, or different things, or it could be specific to like a technical skill too, if not a communications. Okay, someone has a question?
Hi, yes, I have a quick question. I was wondering, like, if it's frowned upon to ask for a second to think about the situation, like if they ask about a situation you weren't prepared to talk about and you're trying to sort of rack your brain for a good example, is it frowned upon to be like, do you mind if I take a second to think about that? Or should you just sort of answer with the first thing that comes to your mind?
Oh no, I think it's okay, because it makes the interviewer think, oh, she's really thinking about how to answer this. And you can always like kind of buy some time to say, I'm sorry, you can either ask to clarify the question, or and some people do say, oh, let me think about this. It's a really interesting question. It's not frowned upon at all. And like, if your first thought, if you have these examples, and I have students who put their like SAR examples from like internships, fellowships, work experience, and they'll tape it on like beside their computer, and so they can like see, like refer to it, and it's in bullet points, so you don't have to be like, okay, so it's not like a scripted thing that you're going, but when you have those, it's a lot of the interview question you'll see, the common interview questions, it's always the same thing in different formats. You'll find that the more you interview. So then not to be caught off guard and be like, oh, this is a similar question I had, but just in a different way that was asked.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Sure.
Maybe at some point we can kind of cover some of those difficult questions, or not difficult questions, but scenarios. So, I feel like a typical one is, tell me a time when you had to get your team to work together. And so that can take a lot of forms. That question can take a lot of forms. but you can find one situation, a story that you can paint and tell, and then show your role
Yeah.
within
That's
that.
That's really important point, Kristen. And also always be positive in your answers. Even like some questions might be, tell me about a time you had to work with a difficult team member. You know, and it really is. And sometimes your results doesn't have to be like an actual, and we all got along. We could just, you could be like, and I learned a lesson, you know, we realized that a better way to communicate is this or that, you know, it's like just talking about the process itself. Okay. So this is another way that you can kind of think about your relevant examples and the using situation, action, result, because so think about the ways in which you learned or have been exposed to experiences. It's not just in school. It's not just in your where you're currently working. You've had internships or fellowships that are very interesting, that is relatable. You have transferable skills to the role that you're applying to. I'm sure you guys have had a lot of community involvement and leadership, and also group projects. It could be, you know, in school, or it could have been when you were interning. So like that experiential learning is really important to kind of refer to when you're talking about your specific examples. Also, like your thesis project or your independent project is something that, you know, a lot of people are excited about sharing. And so just think about ways that, and specific things. You don't have to, you know, go all the way from the beginning of how you came up with your thesis and everything, unless that's, you know, it's relevant and makes your story more compelling and interesting. You can even talk about like you were able to do your thesis work and either with, you know, your professor, but also with maybe a nonprofit manager, or maybe you did your work abroad, and talk about that and why that was important to you. Okay, so we're going to change a little bit to the what the employers want. So what are the hiring managers really kind of looking at? So this is based on the National Association of College and Employers, NACE, which they have like core competencies that they're looking for. They work with employers, they survey them all the time, and they ask them like, what are you really looking for? What would be really good to kind of survey or think about a framework like that when students are doing entry level positions with you? What makes them career ready, and how, and like what sort of things are traits that make a person really thrive in the workforce? Okay, and some of these you've already seen. Communication is very key, and it starts from when you submit your application materials, your cover letter, any email communications you have, and then also your oral when you're actually interviewing. Teamwork, collaboration, you know, in your skills section, your resume, you highlighting your digital technology or language skills. Leadership, and how do you convey leadership? And that kind of goes back to like picking 2 or 3 relevant examples where you led a team, a project, or something. Professionalism and work ethic, are you reliable? Like they might ask certain questions about that and how you work. And like sometimes they even ask you about like, how do you like to be managed? That's a question that is kind of asked sometimes. Career management too, like, are you really self-aware? How do you manage up? How do you work with your peers? But also how do you work maybe if it's like across campus with other different departments and everything? And then also, are you a person who will do well in a diverse environment? And maybe sometimes with the global part, it could be, you know, you might be client facing, and so you might be required to work or travel abroad for your job. And so those are the things that are important. So some of the things that hiring managers are evaluating you on, or even we do this like in mock interviews when I was at Rollins, we're looking at professional tone and appearance. We'll make some notes about that. If you're a clear, concise communication delivery method, if you are able to get your point across and kind of like in a very thoughtful, intentional way. And really, it goes back to also, I was saying about like that feeling they get, like you have to express enthusiasm and positivity and your interest, keep reiterating your interest in the role or the organization. And you know, that likability, I kind of go back and forth on including that because it's more about like approachability. Do they see you as part of their team? Because, you know, they have the advantage of thinking like, we have, you know, they're also, of course, different personality types that are part of a team. And so they're thinking about like, oh, will this person contribute? Will they, you know, do I see them in our work culture and being part of this organization? Okay. So does anyone have any questions up to this point? Because I'm going to go over some of the questions that Emily was asked.
I do have one question on, because I've gotten similar feedback. It might be for a particular role I'm interested in, on being very concise, you know, in your answers and using every sentence that you answer to like speak to how you're qualified for the role.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I was wondering, like, is it still okay, maybe in like the tell me about yourself question, where you maybe add in like a little personal story or something, some kind of way where it's still linked in some way, but that way it can make you still memorable? I'm still kind of finding like difficulty in that kind of, you know what I mean? Like in mending those two.
I know, and it's always, even like in the professional work world, right? Like how personal do you get and how do you keep it, you know, there? It's absolutely fine to add a little thing that's fun. Like if you know, if going back to that example about tell me about yourself, in one scenario, you're saying, oh, I'm originally from Pennsylvania and I moved to Atlanta for my studies because, you know, this is the public health capital of the world. So I was really excited about that. Or sometimes I will say, you know, when I'm interviewing, I'll say, you know, by day I do this, and in my volunteer time, I am a mentor for a first gen program at Emory. And I really love books about business psychology. And so all of it really adds to my role in working in career development with students. You know, you can say something like that.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I know it's like you want to get across the points and you do want to express your qualities of your skills. Like your career story can be about your relevant work experiences, but if you don't have a lot of work experiences, you can talk about your transferable skills too. And like and things about like times that you took initiative or had leadership roles, and how you would be excited to lead a team, you know, where you're applying or something like that. And you can, and sometimes the interviewer will ask you, and it might not be in the tell me about yourself, but maybe later down the road, they might ask you, oh, so what do you do in your free time? You know? And there are ways, if you hit like your tell me about yourself, like 70% of it, like you're talking about, you're doing great, because then you're doing better than someone who didn't prepare at all. But also, if you forget to say something, don't say, oh, I forgot to say, you know, because you do have a little bit of tech. Just think about like, how can I interweave this story in one of my SAR examples later when they're talking about either technical or like a personal question or something, right? And you can always add it to the end of the interview, like, oh, I forgot to mention this. Or you can, sometimes I'll put it in a thank you email. Like if I forgot to say, oh, you know, I was so excited that you're from Pennsylvania, Hershey, Pennsylvania too. And, you know, it's a great place to live and I really enjoyed it. Or I see that we have a lot of mutual connections in Decatur or something, you know, if it's something like that. Okay. So let me see. So Emily, actually I connected Emily and her husband to PPD, which is a contract research organization. And she was really excited about a senior scientist position they had. And so we talked a little bit about this, and I just caught up with her last week, and just I wanted to know, like, what was your interviewing process like? What sort of questions did they ask? And so this part, I'm not going to give you her answers because frankly, I don't know all of them, but some of the things that helped her really prepare, and I put it in the resources section, is that LinkedIn Learning with Jody Glickman about like leading with your destination. She and her husband, it's so cute. They were like practicing back and forth and about like getting there. Tell me about yourself, like concisely. So I just love that part. It was so fun to hear that. Okay. So some of the things, like for her first interview, as I mentioned before, she had it was a 15-20 minute call. The recruiter screener called, and they basically asked her questions like, so what are you looking for in a job? And they reviewed some of the job description, the actual job. And then at the end of the conversation, it was like, oh, so knowing all of this, are you still interested? And that's when you express, of course, I'm interested. Very excited about this, Rob, learning more about it and talking with others about it, okay? So then the second interview was a 30-minute phone call. It was with a hiring manager, and it could sometimes be with your potential supervisor, or sometimes if they're not available, it could be just, you know, somebody else that's not the talent acquisition manager or the recruiter. So in this conversation, the second one, you get a little bit more, and the questions about like, what are some of your technical experiences? And like, this is where it was, what is your favorite assay? Question, and I couldn't even begin to answer that because that's not my background. But I'm sure some of you will, you know, it'll relate. You could think about that and have that prepared. And then some other questions revolved around what's your academic and research background and interests, okay? And this is where you pull back from your relevant experience. It doesn't have to be your most recent. It's just what led you, like, why are you interested in studying this area? And then they'll ask you, so what are you working on now? And it could be something that you're, you know, doing research in, or, you know, something at work, a project at work you can talk about. They might ask you, like, have you ever had experience with, and they'll, you know, name what it is. It could be a certain technique, a platform, or something that they're working on at their organization. They might even ask, are you okay with relocating? Because I must tell you, the position that Emily and her husband moved to was in Wisconsin. And they were, you know, that was one of their things that was just a negotiable thing. They didn't really have in mind. They just wanted like their next adventure to be together. And that's why they were really, I think a lot of people may not want to move. And I don't want to speak, and I'm not, you know, dissing on Wisconsin, but it's something that I think they probably had in the past. Some interviewees that were really excited, but wasn't sure about relocating, okay? So they also, on the interviewer side, they shared their company culture, their organizational culture, where this position fits, you know, overall together for the organization. And then they might ask a personal question like, what do you like to do in your free time? What are you passionate about? That might come up at the second part. Now, the third interview was on Zoom, and it lasted 2 hours, and it was a panel-like interview for Emily. And it was a bunch of back-to-back one-on-one interviews with hiring managers, supervisors, with different managers that were at different part of the organization, right? Because it could be, sometimes they choose those managers based on how much you collaborate with a certain, you know, office or department or something like that. Her husband actually had a 3-hour interview because his was more about people management. And so they probably gave him a lot more behavioral type questions, where Emily said they didn't really ask her a lot of behavioral type questions. It was more about the science and the technology of what she would be doing. But they did ask her about, let me see, how well do you troubleshoot? Because she would be a senior scientist and leading a team on a certain area at PPD. And they also asked her, which is really interesting, is how do you stay current in science? And so one of your answers could be, oh, I'm part of the Georgia Bio Association, and they have really great resources. Another thing could be, like they might also ask like a follow-up question, what do you read and follow? So this is where you talk about the different associations that you're part of, any science forums, any conferences you attended. And Emily mentioned that she reads, Science Magazine or like Science Today. And she also mentioned Reddit, but I don't know if you need to include this here, but it's just, they just want to know, like, how do you stay current in your industry? They might also ask, like, how do you stay organized? What's your time management? This goes along with like your professional work ethic, kind of questions towards that. And they asked a lot of questions relating to teamwork, adaptability, approachability, experiences working for others and with others. And then also they asked her some questions, and I don't think they specifically asked her these questions, but it was about like, how do you take initiative and support others? Like, if you're done your work, do you help others, or are you just kind of just focused on your own thing? So that was some of the questions they asked her. And so one of the things that I found interesting is Emily was saying, just kind of up your small talk when you have, when it's really about the conversation and seeing if you make a connection with the people you would be working for and with, and really think about how they're making you feel. And then also, if you feel like it's been engaging and you've kind of been able to keep their interest and their attention. Okay. Does anybody have, I'm sorry, and also, how do you convey your positivity and motivation through these conversations? Does anybody have any questions about the sort of different format that Emily experienced? Okay, well, I'm going to go to the next part because I want to make sure that we get through to the important salary conversation.
Agnes, do you want to run this kind of like if someone has a question, they can just speak up, or would you prefer to wait for the Zoom hand raise?
Yeah, let me see. If they have any questions, they can put it in chat or they can speak up. And if there aren't any questions now, I know we have about 15 minutes of time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and make sure I get to like the salary conversation stuff. And you can still ask the questions, even if it's not, and it could be a question from something we already covered. Is everybody okay with that?
I just saw a hand raised a minute ago. I'm not sure if that person still has a question, but if you do, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah. Okay.
Not.
Okay for now. I'm sorry if I feel like I'm rushing on me. I'll just kind of slow down.
Oh, here it is.
Currently work on.
It's in the chat, and it says, when you're being asked, what do you currently work on by someone that's not a scientist, what's the best amount of detail to give?
You know what? This is interesting because I covered this a little bit in the elevator pitch for scientists. Like if you're talking about audience, just assume that unless you know your interviewer's title and everything is the senior, like a researcher or something, just give them like a broader area, and then you can ask them like, but don't also be condescending, like, oh, do you know about that? Just, give them an overview of your work. And we can absolutely share like the elevator pitch resources because it tells you a little bit like how much detail, and also like doing it in a concise way. So basically, you want to give them an overview and think about like when you're talking about like a lay person, like how to get this information. Like think about how Dr. Fauci has had to explain very complex information to us during this pandemic. Think about it that way. You want to get your point across, and then you can drill down into details if you think they're interested or that gives them some more information. And usually they'll ask you like, oh, I'm not really familiar with that. Can you explain a little bit more? Okay. Okay. So I'm not going to go too much in depth to this, but I want to let you, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, there are other ways of evaluating you as you get like further and further along in the hiring and interviewing process. Some people might ask you, some organizations might ask you to do a presentation. I had to do a 20-minute recruitment presentation at Rollins when I was applying for the employer relations recruitment job. Sometimes in higher ed, if you're staff, they'll actually ask you to do an assessment test to make sure that you're familiar with some of the communications tools, if you're really, proficient or excel in certain like Google Suite communications or in Microsoft, the Microsoft platforms, just to kind of make sure that you're a good communicator. And then for more of the technical consulting positions, they might ask you to do case scenarios and things. And you can Google that, like Deloitte ask you to do some things. And you can just, if you're kind of interested in learning about what is a case scenario, you can find out some more information there. Okay. So next, knowing your strategy, we're going to kind of switch gears here. Knowing your strategy for the salary conversation. Okay, so part of it is knowing your facts. In the next slide, we're going to go over like what sort of, you want to make sure that you do your homework and knowing like what's the market value of this role and kind of checking a few salary sites and going into that, because you never know when they're going to ask you that salary conversation. We're going to actually go over some sort of strategies to kind of hold off on that, because sometimes hiring managers want to know, like, can I afford you right away? That's one of the first things they want to know. But there's certain timing in their interview process is like kind of the sweet spot to have that conversation. Okay. You want to know what are your negotiables and non-negotiables. As I mentioned, Emily and her husband, a negotiable was where they live and work, where some people said, I have to be in Atlanta. This is near my family. I like all the opportunities here, and I really am finding something here. Okay. And, some people, non-negotiables are salary for them. Like, I have to make a certain amount or be in this range to feel comfortable, feel like my value's added, or, to start off my career in a positive, like I want to feel like I am earning what I'm worth. That is a non-negotiable for some people. Okay. Oh, how do you, yes. Some people will put, and sometimes, the field is required. If it's an open-ended field, some people will put like, competitive or not. Well, some people just don't put it at all. Not applicable. Or does anybody have some examples of what they've been putting in?
Well, not what I've been putting in, but in my experience, it's been like a required field, and it's been where you have like it'll only accept numbers. Like like if you try to put in NA or like no text, they won't accept it. So it's like they're making you put in a number or a range.
Yeah, that's it's true. And I have actually been a hiring manager where I see on the other end, some people just put all zeros there. Honestly, it just depends. Sometimes they will ask you kind of drill a little bit deeper in the first conversation. Like, do you know that this is a grant funded position and this is, the salary we're thinking? That part on the application, when you have to put it depends. Like if you are a current student and you are like on a fellowship or something, that I think they have that context in mind, especially if you put it in your cover letter and everything. That's a tricky one. That really is. I think it's something that kind of stumps everybody all the time. But that's something that, say you took a pay cut from a previous job, you can verbally kind of, when you have that salary conversation, explain in context why you put that in your application. Okay. But just remember that you always want to keep the conversation positive. I know it can be awkward talking about money in general or finances. I think it's one of those conversations that is never pleasant, but if you feel like you have to be an advocate for yourself, and I always say you should be, don't accept the first offer that they give you. They're kind of always expecting you to say, is this your best offer? Or something like that. Okay. And then articulating your value, like your experiences, your skills, like a value statement of why you are worth this much, or being compensated because of your experiences and skills. You also want to be reasonable. What I mean by this is, sometimes, especially higher education, in higher education, they will do like a middle range. And so, there's a lower range, middle, and higher. So depending on how much experience you have, if you hit like all of the minimum requirements and preferred, you're probably on the higher end of the salary scale. If you don't have as much experience, you must know that you're at like the beginning range, possibly to the middle if you have had some more experience, or if you can convey it in a way that you're going to be adding and contributing right away, or showing them in verbally or talking verbally about the results that you were able to have or outcomes that you've had in your past experiences. Okay. And the other thing is very important is timing. So I'm going to have a slide about that. Okay, so make sure you research comparable job titles, and make sure you really read and highlight, the job description, what's required and what's preferred. But I don't want you to kind of get hung up on that, like, oh, I don't have the preferred. That's not always a conversation stopper. It's just, and it's something that you say, although I don't have as much experience in this, I'm really a quick learner, and I'm really interested in this field and learning and growing in it. So make sure you also compare website salaries. This is not an all-inclusive list or extensive list. There are other ones that you can look at. And then you want to be prepared with your target salary range and you'll know that after doing some of your research. And make sure that you're looking in your location, because what is a compensation in Atlanta will be different in DC or Boston or New York, because they build in a little bit of that cost of living and relocation. Sometimes they will have relocation compensation for you. And consider the whole offer package. And this is where I mean, it's not just the salary. Sometimes you'll be able to negotiate on your benefits, vacation time, your start date, thinking about what they contribute to your retirement package, your location, and other things in the package. It's not just about salary. I just see a question about if their initial offer is within the salary range that you indicated earlier in press, can you still negotiate? Yes, of course, they do. They do. And there's actually in the next slide, let me go over about the timing. Okay, so this, you guys, is where the salary negotiation gets fun. It's like you're starting that first interview, like, who are you? You're telling them about yourself, not just once, but over and over again to every person that you meet as part of the hiring process. Then they're like, wow, she's really interesting. She has all the qualifications, the skills. When you get the interview, it's really, they already know that you're pretty qualified. You're like one of their top applicants. They usually just interview like 3 interviews for a position. That's usually the rule of thumb. So this is like at this point, it's like you've already had this conversation. They're really thinking about like what you would bring, and they can really see you here, right? And so they're starting to really like you. They can see you here. And then they're getting to the point where they're like, oh my gosh, okay, she's one of our top applicants. He or she is one of our top applicants, and we really must have them. So how will we get to that point? Okay. But sometimes hiring managers will ask you early in the conversation when it's part of like, who are you? And, we like you, but can we afford you right here? And so what I recommend is, as much as you can, and I know sometimes you have to put in your application, but if it's not a requirement in your application, don't give it. I would sometimes the 2 main reasons why you shouldn't talk about salary early And this could be like for most job opportunities or in the early stage of your career, like up to 10 years out of school, is because the two main reasons why you should wait is that after the interview process is complete, the employer may believe you are worth even more than they had originally planned, especially compared with other applicants. And another thing is you avoid the risk of alienating employers with salary requirements before they have decided that they must have you, okay? And so some of the things that you could ask if they say, if they're really insistent about giving you giving them a salary ranges. So what do you usually pay someone in this position? So other possible responses and kind of like delaying the salary conversation is, I prefer to discuss salary after I learn more about the responsibilities of the job and we can determine if I'm a strong fit for your organization. You can also say, I would wish to be compensated in line with the skills and abilities I have to offer your organization. Or you just name the organization. Or you can also say, what range did you have in mind? Kind of flipping the question on them. But if they're really insistent and like it says the salary offer, or sometimes they will say, salary is not negotiable. You can totally ask them, so is this offer consistent with what you are providing other candidates for this role? Okay. So does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry, I wish I could, what, I will have to go back and think about what is the best way about writing your salary requirements and applications. I've come across that myself, honestly, and it's something that I don't feel comfortable doing, but it's, everybody has to do it. So that's the only thing that is equitable for them. But I wish it didn't have to be part of the application process because you want them to pay you for what you will be doing and not think about how much you were paid for what you were doing. Okay, so are there any questions about this part?
I did have a question if they are just kind of insistent if you're going back and forth and they're still really asking for you to give an actual number.
Yeah.
Is it at that point that you would give the range that you've kind of researched on and you found that it's your target range? Would you just kind of finally give it then, or?
Yeah, and you would put it in a way and try to keep it positive where you say, knowing what you're asking for in this role and taking into account my experiences, and then I feel that the range of, you give them a range, would be a fair compensation, but I'm open to the conversation, open to talking more about it. But you don't ever want to say, so do you have any concerns or anything? You always end it on a positive note because they might get into that, okay? So lastly, I want to make sure we cover the prompt follow-up. Make sure you do it within 24 hours. Every person that interviewed you, usually if it's like a Zoom invite or like you'll have their emails. But if it's not provided, you can always say in your email, please convey my thank you to your colleague and name them so that you include everybody there. So make sure, you thank them for the time and the certain date and name the position you applied for, recall some important conversations that you had, and then thank them again and reiterate your interest. And so, also like sometimes people will also ask about like next steps. So this is my example of when I applied to my current position. So I said, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. It'll have the date in the email, of course, taking the time sharing with me. And it's a grant fund position. And so I talk about the integrated coach team they're trying to put together. And then I talk about, a little fact, always, take good notes as you're interviewing so that I could refer back to that. And I said, and I was really, I really love that you emphasized the importance of building career literacy. I would be thrilled to lead in this area. Looking forward to our continuing conversation and hearing from you soon. Okay. And so the key takeaways is preparation is key. Give yourself, at least 2 hours, half a day to prepare for the interview. Do your research about the organization and who you'll be interviewing with. LinkedIn is your friend in this term here. And don't feel funny if you ask to connect with your interviewer and they don't answer back, because sometimes it's against their policy to do so until you're actually in the organization. Okay, so I don't want you to take that personally. It's just sometimes it's like a professional etiquette thing. Be intentional in your interview, really get your key talking points and kind of anticipate the type of questions they might ask. And it's really on the context of the role of the person interviewing you. So someone who's in communications really might want to know about your communications and your experience in that. Someone who's in finance might really want to know about, have you worked with teams before? How are your sales goals or different things like that. So you want to identify key points to get across for each person and refer back to that STAR or to STAR method. Always respond positively, even if the behavioral question was, so what did you think about your last boss? You always keep it positive, okay? You can be authentic and share, but you just want to always not put anybody else in a negative light during your interview. So the other important thing is ask good questions. I think a lot of times where you have the time and spot to really kind of shine is asking good questions. There are always hiring managers at the end. Do you have any questions for me? And a lot of people just don't do their research or have those questions prepared. And it's think about something that you talked about during the interview and something that's just not easily found like online. Okay, because it really shows that you put in the effort and the homework and the research and that you were a super sleuth and you were really prepared for this. And always send a prompt thank you email. Okay, so I know we're at time or past time, sorry about that a little bit, but these are the resources for learning and practice, and I can share this. I will share this with the hyperlinks with everybody, but I want you to pay close attention to the Jody Glickman on pitching yourself. And I really feel like a lot of the synopsis of what we went over today is the Pete Makaitis podcast, which is on LinkedIn Learning. And it's really great because then, everybody has Zoom fatigue. So this is just a podcast that you're listening to, and it takes you through all the different key steps there, okay? And then there are a few articles that I found helpful in thinking about how you should frame things. And then there are also, I should have shared some more like salary negotiation ones. And if I come across any, I will share with you guys as well. So we covered a lot. I'm sorry, I feel like I just talked nonstop. I hope everybody found some things helpful. And I really, I think at this point, everybody was at a 3 mostly. Some people were higher at a 4.5, 8. I hope that your confidence in preparing for interviews and what to expect is a little bit higher as we end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Agnes.
You're welcome.
And yeah, so you can send that to me and anything else you find on the salary negotiation, and I'll send that out with the follow-up email this afternoon, if that's available. If not, I'll forward it when I have it from you.
Okay.
And so everybody's the deliverable today is that follow-up thank you email. So just make it hypothetical for the job that you want with the employer that you want.
Yeah, and feel free to link in with me, you guys. This is something that I just love working with, early career professionals in this area. And I know it's, can be nerve-wracking, as someone mentioned earlier. And the more prepared, just think about when you prepare for a test for anything really, the more you're prepared, the more confident you'll feel. And you have these do little cheat sheets, pull up examples here. That's one of the silver linings of our virtual world right now. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you guys have any other questions, we'll hang out for a few minutes, but otherwise have a great Monday and we'll see you Wednesday.